During my not-so-long life there were a lot of entertaining stories and incidents. Many of them still pop up in my memory from time to time, instantly reviving the events of past years. Still, it's great to realize that life has not been lived in vain, that a lot has been done during this time. Oh yes, I almost forgot. My name is Petr Vasilyevich, I am 52 years old. At the moment I am not working anywhere, but I receive disability benefits. A little further I will explain what it is. So, recently my son gave me a computer so that I don't get bored doing nothing, sitting on four walls. It was then that I decided for myself that I would periodically write down bright moments from my life in order to refresh them in my memory in case of emergency. And then the grandchildren will be interested in what the grandfather did in his dashing years. And I want to start my diary with an event that turned my whole life upside down. It was the cause of my disability, coupled with premature gray hair at the temples. Without further ado, let us get started. It was a long time ago, when I was barely 30 years old. At that time my job was to protect especially important natural sites and reserves. My competence included the supervision of the forest belt, the coastline, the habitats of various rare animals and so on. Do not think that my partners and I were guarding only one specific sector. We were often transferred to other places in shifts. And by the word translated I mean thrown where the finger on the map will point. It used to happen that you spent one shift in your native southern city and then you were sent on the very first flight to the Siberian forests, and then think what you want. This is what we had to do. Of course, this was not always the case, but still there is little pleasant in this. One day I received a telegram from our department. I took the yellow sealed envelope out of the mailbox and went home. There I opened the letter. It said that on such and such a date I was sent to a security post located in such and such an area at such and such coordinates. But there was one strange thing. There was not a word in the letter about who I would have to keep watch with. It turns out that I will have to step in to replace one. The rest of the day I spent on preparations. I collected some provisions, a change of clothes, and equipped myself with everything necessary. Quite exhausted, I fell into bed. The next morning, having had a quick breakfast and throwing a backpack over my shoulders, I was already rushing on the earliest bus to the neighboring city where the driver was supposed to be waiting for me. The trip took no more than 2 hours. The bus stopped at the bus station, brakes screeching. I got out of the transport and caught sight of a nearby US, near which a driver I knew was smoking. After saying hello and putting my things in the trunk, we started off. The trip I think is not worth describing. The man was not very talkative, so all the time that we were driving I looked out the window. So, imperceptibly for myself I arrived at the place entrusted to me. It turned out to be pretty picturesque. We drove past the water protection zone sign and pulled up in front of a checkpoint hidden in the canopy of coniferous trees. Almost immediately a disheveled guard ran out of the booth with the barrier towards us. Having checked our documents with the driver, he opened the way for us. After driving another 2 or 3 kilometers, we finally arrived at the place. A huge sunlit lake appeared before my eyes. The forests around him burned emerald. A light breeze hit my face, carrying the intoxicating smell of crystal clear water. For a minute I even forgot. It seemed to me that I came here not to work but to relax, as to a resort. I was brought out of the trance by the smoky cough of the driver unloading my things. I jumped right in and helped him. He explained to me how to get to the gatehouse. So this is it. Now you will pass this turn and then go straight. As soon as you hit the fence, count already there. The last guard, I think, has not had time to leave yet, so he will give you a tour and briefing. The driver spoke in a hoarse voice, actively gesticulating. After listening carefully to him I waved goodbye to him and very quickly disappeared around the corner. On the way to the lodge I remembered school trips. Indeed, literally everything reminded me of those carefree times. And the invigorating forest air and the singing of birds and the strumming of a metal mug in my backpack. A whistle pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned around. On the porch of a house standing 30 meters from me, a table of a man raising his hand. This, as I later realized, was my previous shift. Shaking hands we went inside the building. So, you're this Vasilik, right? Yeah. So listen here. The places here with us, as you probably already understood, are very deaf. But this does not mean that you need to open the mitten and beat the buckets. Trust me, this place is a magnet for poachers and drunken punks. And don't forget about wild animals. So be always on the lookout. The interlocutor recited to me, putting a tick in the journal of the changing of the guards. He spoke a little haltingly and quickly, as if he wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. This alerted me. Look here. He pointed to a large wall map where the boundaries of the protected area were marked in red. You are on duty here. No more foot. Make a round every half an hour and make appropriate notes about it in the journal. So what else? The weapons are in the safe. "I give you the keys." The shift took out small keys from his waistcoat pocket and handed them to me. "Lanterns, food and so on I think you will find, not small. And one more thing." He somehow hesitated strangely, as if inwardly hesitating to say something very important. "Oh, nothing, never mind." Like he said everything. "Do you know your duties? Great. Good luck then." The guard winked and walked out the door. I was left alone with my thoughts, trying to process the incoming information. A little later, having laid out the things I had brought, I went to chop wood. In a couple of hours I chopped fresh logs and put them on the stove. After that I decided to take a walk and at the same time explore the area and make sure that outsiders did not wander into the territory. I walked like this until evening. Returning to my house, I fired up the stove and warmed up some currant tea. The coziness that filled the room and the crackle of firewood in the stove made me sleepy, which made me doze a little, looking out the window at the fading evening sky over the lake. Suddenly a creaking sound was heard outside the gatehouse walls. I jumped up and spilled the hot drink all over myself. The spilled boiling water quickly sobered me up. Cursing, I began to dust myself off. The rattle was repeated but closer. Alert, I began to listen to the night silence of the forest. To do this I slightly opened the window. However, I heard nothing but the noise of trees and trills of night birds. 5 minutes later an incomprehensible sound again made itself felt. This time it sounded somewhere overhead. Are the bumps falling? I tried to understand. Or did the moose come to the smell of food? I got up from my chair and tiptoed towards the exit. Slowly opening the door, I stuck my head out. Grave silence. Taking myself in hand, I put on my jacket and with a lantern went out into the night forest. The lake roared behind me, the tree trunks crackled above me, but that strange sound was not there. I walked around the house illuminating every bush. Nobody. After winding a couple more circles I began to move away from the gatehouse. Fir branches and leaves crunched underfoot. Crunch. But this was clearly not a branch. I whirled around frantically, spinning the lantern. The yellow cone of light slid along the trunks of the trees, resting against the darkness of the thicket. In the distance the window of my outpost gleamed. With my eyes I was already looking for some animal or the joker who wanted to mock me so cruelly. Finding nothing and no one, I was again attacked by an incomprehensible night sound. He came from behind. Turning around and gathering all my strength into a fist, I shouted as convincingly as possible, "Hey, who you are? Get out immediately. I have a weapon. I will start shooting." As expected, my answer was silence. Immediately I remembered the weapon and slapped my forehead. The gun was in the safe, damn it. After standing like this for several minutes, listening, I decided to go to the gatehouse. Lord, what a fool I am. It cannot be quiet here. I have been working in such places for a year now, and then suddenly for no reason I put it in my pants. Frightened by the crunch of trees. What nonsense. With these thoughts I turned towards the house and was about to go, but immediately stopped. There was a tree a couple of meters from me. It stood right on the trajectory of the route by which I came here. There simply could not be a tree there physically, unless I am a ghost to go through it. Wondering how this could happen, I began to examine the suddenly appeared plant. I felt it. The bark is like a bark, the real one. Solid as always. I don't understand anything. Walking around the tree from all sides, still not understanding, I decided to look up. Oh, I should have immediately understood that this was a trap. Shining the beam of the flashlight upwards, I did not see the crown. I saw something more frightening. Another such huge tree standing not far away, detached from the earth and entered it again, but in a different place. Two wide eyes lit up above me. The terrible rattle of breaking wood filled literally the entire forest, and eyes from a height rushed to me. I screamed, falling on my back. And then a terrible realization came to me of everything that was happening. What I mistakenly took for trees turned out to be feet. At the same moment 2 more trees fell vertically to my right and left with a roar. A flashlight lying on the ground illuminated the night visitor. A monstrous tree monster, dropping on all fours, carefully examined me with its luminous eyes. Each one was the size of a car. I was engulfed in a wave of hot air that smelled terribly of tar, mushrooms and moss grew over its spark-patterned body. In some places even the semblance of branches could be seen. For a minute the forest creature stared at me with its glassy gaze, and I at it. In a daze I couldn't move. The whole body was paralyzed by primal wild horror. I began to crawl back little by little, looking into the eyes of the creature. It seemed to be played with me on purpose. Backing away, I suddenly felt a stone under my palm. At this point, Fear played a cruel joke on me. Automatically grabbing a cobblestone, I threw it with all my strength into the muzzle of the forest giant. It was a fatal mistake. The monster roared and everything went cold inside me. A terrible howl resounded over the forest. It was a wild mixture of the cry of an elephant and the guttural growl of some unknown monster. The tree giant stood up to its full height. At a height of 40 meters, like the searchlights of a helicopter, two huge eyes burned. I jumped to my feet and started running. Obeying the instinct of self-preservation, I flew into my hut like a bullet and locked myself up, but then the worst happened. The nightmarish leg crept up to the house in one step, and the roof cracked. Beams, like matches, broke and the roof with part of the walls quickly rose up. I just had time to see how the creature threw away a lump of boards and again stared at me with a freezing look. Adrenaline hit in the head and gave the command to run. With the agility of a lynx, I jumped over the broken logs of the walls and rushed into the thicket. Oberzina once again let out a deafening roar full of anger and rushed after me. I, trying to get lost in the dark, dodged between the trunks of trees, constantly changing the trajectory. Each step of the monster shook the ground, knocking me off my feet. You could even hear the trees falling nearby. Behind me I heard a terrible crack and heavy breathing. I ran like this for several kilometers, driven by only one desire: to escape. And the creature never left me for a minute. Hen's trees swept over my head, tearing down perennial pines like straws. After a while, the strength began to leave me. Already almost resigned to my fate, I suddenly realized what to do. Having run behind another tree with an arrow, I froze, leaning against the trunk. The roar which had been coming from behind all this time at one moment also ceased. There was an oppressive silence. Now who will outsmart whom? Looking half-heartedly from behind the tree, I saw the monster looking around in confusion, moving its long limbs. It has lost me. Quietly, so as not to attract attention, I crawled to the shore, hoping to hide in the reeds. With smooth movements moving aside dry branches and leaves, I moved into the coastal thickets. Having crawled a few meters, I stopped in order to assess the situation and not create unnecessary noise. Alas, my plan was not crowned with success. This was eloquently stated by the roar and crackle heard above me. A gigantic fist firmly pinned me to the ground. I howled in pain. Nightmare pain spread all over my body. This creature crushed my legs. The monster slowly leaned towards me, still terrifyingly staring into my soul. I stared at him, exhausted. Consciousness left my exhausted body. The last thing I saw before turning off was a bright white light emanating from his empty, nothing expressive eyes. I woke up in the hospital. A heart rate monitor beeped monotonously above his ear. There was a slight double vision in his eyes. His head was stuffed with cotton wool. Looking around the ward, I noticed that a game with a long transparent tube was inserted into my forearm. Oddly enough, the thought of the events of the previous night did not bother me in the least. I tried to get up, but I didn't feel my legs stretching out my neck. I was horrified. All that remained of my legs were stumps wrapped in sterile bandages, in some places already soaked with blood. ! Everything swam in my eyes. Coldness spread over my body, turning into heat, and I passed out again. And then, darkness. After I was discharged from the hospital, I could not come to terms with the loss of my legs for a very long time. Moreover, the doctors claimed that they found me already without them in an unconscious state. They stubbornly insisted that a bear or a wolf could be to blame. I felt fear and a note of calming lies in their voice, but I didn't show it. Now I still can't return my legs. What I saw on that fateful night was enough for me. The cold, piercing look of two burning eyes still haunts me in my dreams. Now, after so many years, it is interesting to reflect on all this. Were the doctors deliberately intimidated into explaining my injuries as a banal attack by wild animals? Why hasn't anyone else heard of that place by the lake? What, or rather, WHO, were they trying to hide from everyone? I don't know the answers to these and many other questions.